All right, so today's main topic for Python is going to be user-defined functions. But I wanted to start off, the homework's due, what, Wednesday? No, next week?
Next Monday.
Wow, you still got a whole nother week. That's great.
Good thing.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the homework?
I can't get my count to work.
A
Do
counter?
I have to do, when I do the for loop, you know, the input.
So you're doing a for loop.
Right, I put the input and put the, like, I equals size.
Okay, well you don't do I equals.
Or, not I
I
equals.
in
I in size or whatever.
Range.
Range, yeah. Whatever.
And then 6, for example.
Yeah, whatever.
And then print I. No semicolon. That wants me to save this somewhere.
I just need to know, do I need to have like a nested while loop
For which,
to store the data for like...
The very first problem?
Yeah, the very first problem.
For the very first, hold on, let me pull it up. Here, let's see.
Because that's the only way I can think of, I just haven't tried it yet.
So the first problem, you're requested to enter desired number of values. You loop through them, put them in a list, and then you create 2 lists with the same values but generated in different. One way is originally initialized to desired length, the other starts empty and appends them. So no, I don't think you need a nested loop, because a nested loop is going to be where you're working through, say, a matrix, or you're trying to do, that's the most common use of a nested loop, is to go through a matrix of things. Here you just have a list, but you're doing that in 2 different ways. So when I solved this problem, I did it where I have one loop and it creates both of them at the same time.
Okay.
But you could do 2 loops. You could have one loop to create the first list and another loop to create the second list. Okay? But it's easier just to do it with one loop. But no, a nested loop is not the right way to go about this.
Okay, because I couldn't get it to do the interval 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why I was going to put a nested loop to do the count.
Okay. Well, I mean, the way I worked this is to just have a single loop, and in the loop use the input command, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But here, do your input a single value, and then place in list 1 and place in list 2. That's sort of how I did it.
Okay.
I had one loop. I read in a single number, put it in the first list, put it in the second list, and then did the next thing through the loop.
Did it in a more cool way.
But it doesn't matter. I mean, there's a million ways you could solve that. Okay. Other questions about the homework? Have you gotten going on the second problem? I mean, that's the beefy one. We need to make sure we get going on that. Okay, so I want to hurry up and get going. You've already lost half of your time on the homework, so it's going to end up getting crushed because that one is longer. Okay? So no other questions now for the homework? Should we go on and talk about some other stuff? Sure. Okay. All right. First thing, in this problem, you see you have to use the input command. So, I don't know, I've not tried this in the command line. Let me try this. X equals input, enter number. No? All right, well, let's put it in here then. X. Well, come on. Why are you not giving me any input? Well, that's the way input works, isn't it? Come on. What am I doing wrong? Is it just not working right in Spider or something?
Mine was working when I did that.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like you did it right.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
mine works. Mine just worked.
I'm
Just
finding
like that.
some of the stuff you did in class when I type it into mine, it ain't right. It's an installation problem.
Oh, try selecting your folder because mine just prompted me to select a folder, kind of like MATLAB does.
oh, I'm in the wrong console. Am I? No.
I'm in IPython and it works there.
I think I was in the wrong one. Yeah, I was in the wrong window. I was in the Python console, which is just where you type stuff. Then the IPython console is the interactive part where you see the output. Okay, well, it's a problem with understanding how to use Spider. Okay, now, the other thing I want to do, and this is what I was mentioning before that can be an issue, is understanding what types that things get returned as. So you'll notice that that x is not an integer. Okay, it's a string. Okay, everybody see how I saw that by putting to print out the type of x? And I guess you probably could see that here in the variable explorer. Say x is a string. And so this is something that gets me a lot in Python because you never know, in MATLAB everything sort of always, the data types just sort of work themselves out and it's not a big issue. But in Python there's all the time when I'm trying to figure out what do I have to pass to a function, some sort of built-in function, and what does it return? What is the data type I need to send to it, and what is the data type that it returns? So here you see that is a string. Then I could say I can convert that to an integer. I think that works. Should work. Let's try running that. Okay, so here I got in x, I typed in 7, then x itself is a string. Then I converted x into an integer and stored it in y, and then I displayed the integer y, and then I can see the type is an integer. Okay, so input will always return you a string. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, so you'll need that. You'll need that for the homework, and actually the example I wanted to do here in a minute after I talk about functions, we'll need that again. Okay, so how do you define a function? Well, I think I usually put my functions before the code of the main part of the code, but I'm pretty sure anywhere in your code you can put the definition of the function. I don't think it matters. And you use DEF to say that you're wanting to define a function, and then you give the function name. Okay, and then you say what the input arguments are. Okay. Okay, and then like any block of code, you need to end that with a colon to say now I want to have a block of code. You notice it automatically indents. Okay, so everything that is indented here is going to be inside the function. So for example, I can print inside function, and then I can say a is equal to 3.141592 times radius squared. I had to resist the temptation to put a caret. In Python, you do asterisk asterisk for squared, and then I can do print a. And then down here, I can say my function, and then pass to it 5.6, and then maybe do again my function 2. Okay, and when I run that, here we get a hello because that's the beginning of my code, and then I'm inside the function. There's 5.6 squared times pi, there's 2 squared times pi. Okay? So what's interesting is that you sort of don't need to, you know, if this had been C++, you'd have to have like a main function and then have another function. But basically anything that is not indented here is going to be the main function that runs. Now let me test something. I'm pretty sure you can define the function in the middle of your code even. Let's see. This is a little, so you can see first it does start, then it gets to the function definition, which does nothing, and then it does the rest. It says hello, and then it calls that function twice. Okay, so the function definition can be anywhere in your code. It can be at the beginning, it can be at the end, it can even be in the middle, you see here. So anything that's not indented is going to be the main part of your function when you run, the main part of your program when you run the .py file. Okay. So notice there's yes. I think if I accidentally tab that in, it should probably give an error. Unexpected indent. So if I try to run it, it gives an error. So it'll fuss at you. If you accidentally indented this, that will be part of the function. So now it doesn't say hello. It says hello every time it runs the function because, you know, that hello is indented. Okay? Now, if you accidentally indented here, it should give you an error. I thought. Yes. That gives you an error as well. That can't be indented.
So the indentation serves the function, the purpose of end.
The indentation is like the end in a MATLAB function. It's like the curly braces in a C++ block of code. Exactly. The indentation white space has function here in Python. It makes a difference. Okay? So notice that the input argument has no data type. Just like MATLAB, you pass something, when you declare a function, you say what the input arguments are named in that local scope, but you don't say what the data types. So whatever gets passed to radius, whatever data type is passed to radius is going to be the data type. And so I'm not sure, I never thought about trying this, but if I print type of radius each time I'm in the function, okay, the first time in the function I pass 5.6 and radius is a float. The second time I pass 2 and it's an int. Okay, so whatever gets passed to it is going to be whatever it is. So that's kind of interesting. Now in this case it doesn't matter whether it's a float or an int, the same thing happens because I square it and then multiply it. Yes?
How would you pass in like a user specified number to that?
So pass in a user specified, like
right.
instead of passing 5.6, ask the user to enter a number?
Enter a number.
Okay, so you do something like x is equal to input give me a radius, and like a good unit Nazi I am, we'll have that entered in centimeters. Okay, now recall that x is a string, so I don't think if I pass a string in there and I try to multiply it by 3.154 and all that stuff and try and square it, this will probably give me an error. Okay, unsupported type. I can't raise a string to a power. Okay, so I would then need to convert this into whatever, a float is more general than an integer. So if I convert it to a float first, then when I type in, even though I typed in a 6, it got forcibly typecast to a float rather than an integer, and then it worked. Okay? So, pretty straightforward. Okay? Now, how do you return something? Okay? It's really easy. I mean, in MATLAB, you have to write here, y equals or whatever things you want to return. In Python, you don't have to do any of that. All you do is say, I want to return something. You know what? I want to return A.
Can you return multiple things?
Yes, you can return multiple things. Wonderful. So nice, right? It's one of my big pet peeves with C++ is if you want more than one thing, you got to send by reference. Really annoying. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it straight up. Let's go ahead and I'll return both the radius and the area. Okay, and I can say, okay, r comma a equals, and then I can print r and a. So now give me rate. It doesn't even matter. I'm not even using that one. There's 6. So here, this is the part where we're really talking about. So I pass to the function 2. Okay, it squares. It does 3.14. Then it prints the area, the 12.56. Then it returns and it gets both. Oh, I changed the order. It puts a into r and it puts radius into a. So that's the area and that's the radius. That's the area and then that's the radius. Okay, so I receive them by putting commas between them, and if I want to return multiple things, I just put commas. And those things, these could be different data types. One of them could be a list, one could be a NumPy array, another could be a Boolean. You know, it doesn't matter. You just put after commas whatever you want to return. And then you can catch them if you want to. You don't have to. I haven't tried this, but let me catch just one. That I'm assuming that's just going to give me the first one, the A, the area. So let's try that. So, oh well, now isn't that interesting? It did not do what I thought it would do. So the function returned a and radius, and I only caught it in one variable. And when I printed that out, it gave me both of them. It looks like they're a list. Okay, let's confirm that. Let's not just print the area, but let's print the type of area. So, oh, it's not a list, it's a tuple. Okay, and that makes sense because it's parentheses and not if it had been brackets, I think it would have been a list. So it returned them as a tuple. And remember, the only difference between a tuple and a list is that you can't change a tuple. So I couldn't change any of the elements of area. Okay, so that's interesting. If I only accept one thing but it returns many, it puts them all in a tuple and hands them to you. So that's kind of interesting. I just learned something I didn't know. I thought it would just take the first one. Like in MATLAB, it'll just give you the first one rather than putting them in a cell array, essentially. Is what okay? So that's kind of neat. All right. What's that?
No, I was wondering why it returned both, but it's because it's defined in my func as returning area and radius.
Yeah, in my function, I tell it to return both. And if I only ask for one thing, it actually gives everything that's returned, but as a tuple. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Now, let me show you a pitfall. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and sort of start over. Okay, print my list, my list. Let's say we're going to change the index number 2 in the list to be the number 0, and then I'm going to print my list again. And then in my main function, I'll say x is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I will say my function, pass it the list, and then I'm going to print in main and print x again. Okay, so the list starts out with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It gets printed as such inside the function. I change the second element to 0, and print that out inside the function. Then once I'm back in main, I print it out again, and that 0 is still there. Okay? And this is because, and you wouldn't think so. You would, in other programming languages, this the function scope, this local variable mylist, it's not the same as x. There's x in the main scope, there's mylist in the function scope, and changing mylist in the function scope should not change anything in the global scope, because that's a local variable. Indeed it is. I mean, mylist does not exist in the global workspace, okay? Function scope, in the variable scope, but remember, anytime x is copied, mylist, x gets copied into mylist. But remember, when you copy variables, you're copying the address to them. You're not copying the contents. So mylist is actually pointing to the same memory location that x is. And so if I change something here, it's going to end up being changed outside of here. Essentially, everything is passed by reference in Python. I mean, whenever you use the equal sign, it's passed by reference as well. I mean, that's just the way it is. When you do x equals y, that's copying the reference of y into x, not the value of y into x. So you need to be careful about this. You need to use that copy command, and if you want to be really sure, use the deep copy to make sure that when you change something, it won't be changed back. Okay? So that's really important to keep in mind, that basically everything is passed by reference in Python, because copying, using the assignment operator in Python, copies by reference and not by value. Okay, so got to keep that in mind.
So what's the use of using the return? Well,
yeah, I mean, you don't need to return something. Let's say I actually wanted that list to be changed. I could do this. I could say, return my list, and I could say, x is equal to my function x. And this will have the same effect, but is more lines of code. So, if you didn't understand all that stuff about reference and you were trying to do it, you might do it this way, but there's no reason why you can't do it this way. It's just different. Okay? Let's do some multiple inputs. Let's do A, B, C, D, and we'll do something really simple. Let's just do return A times B times C times D. And let's do my function 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll say x is equal to, and we'll do that. And just because I like it better this way, I'm going to move this thing down so that it's together, all my main function code is all together. Okay, so here simply I just took 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, ends up with 24. Okay, so if you want to send in multiple input arguments, you just separate them by commas. They could be any data types, doesn't matter, whatever is accepted is what data type it's going to end up being. Okay, one interesting thing is that you can make default arguments. Now, I swear did I talk about this before in class, or did I talk about it maybe in office hours with somebody? Must have been. But have you guys ever done default arguments in C++? Because you can do this in C++ as well. Anybody done that before? Default arguments? So here I set that, basically D is going to be the number 2 unless the user passes something to it. So even though I put the equals 2 there, it's going to give the same result. Okay? But if I only pass 3 things to my function, it will assume that that D is 2. So now it takes 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 3 is 6, and then it takes 6 times D, which D is 2 because I didn't pass it anything. Okay? So that's kind of neat.
You'd have to prevent else statements.
something.
Right. Yes, you could prevent an else statement. You know, like if you're sometimes you want to pass 3 things, and other times you only want to pass 4 or whatever, and you can get rid of some of these if an if structure in that. So yes, that's a good idea. Yes.
Otherwise, you get an error on a non-number or not zero. That's not another default for it.
For what?
For whatever.
Yeah, if you take d equals 2 out.
So if I did this, it will probably give an error. Yes. Missing, my function is missing one of the required positional arguments. D is missing. So unless you give it a default value, it will give you an error. Okay?
So it just overrides if you were to put a 4th value in there.
Right. If you pass it a 4th value, it'll override the default with what the user specifies. And we could have multiple things be default. Well, let me try something. I'm curious whether you can do this. Well, I know you can do this. Okay. I know that this will work. Okay. So now it just takes 1 times 2, then times 2, then times 2, and gives 8. Okay. And of course I can pass in 4 and get 20, or I can pass in 3 things and get the 12. Either way. What I'm curious about is if I can do this. Try it. Okay, I didn't think, this does not work in C++, and it does not work in Python either. And basically, if you have a default argument, everything after that must also be default. Okay, so I can't have a default argument and then something that's not a default, because then it sort of is ambiguous. Let's say I was going to pass 2 things. So I guess that 1 is supposed to be A and that 2 is supposed to be C, and there's no B, so it's a little ambiguous what's going on if you mix the default and the non-default.
What if you were to put an extra comma in there? Would it still give you an error?
An extra comma?
Yeah, so
like that you mean?
No, in the myfunc.
Yeah, here, down here?
Yeah, so if you put an extra comma, so
and nothing?
Above the 2, so it pass in nothing, so
So where do we want me to put the comma?
In front of the 2.
In front of the 2, here. Yeah, I'm
so
pretty sure that'll give an error too. Well, let me do this. Yeah, it's just invalid syntax because there has to be something in between that.
I was wondering if you set B to a number and then try to do that because it passed in the default.
Yeah, it won't. It won't.
Okay.
Because this is invalid syntax, so you can't just put a comma.
Okay.
Yeah, you just can't do that. Yeah, it's a good idea. Okay, so this does work. Again, that gives you 8. Okay, now let's say, and this is something I don't think you can do in C++. Let's say that I wanted to leave C as its default value, but I wanted to specify D. Okay, now I could just type in 2 and then say what I want for D. I mean, I could do that. Okay, but let's say, maybe I don't even know what the default value is or whatever. You can say, I want D to be 5. This is really a really curious thing about Python. It's really interesting. I've never seen this in another language, that you can specify that I want D to be 5, C ends up as its default 2, and then the A and B get specified. Okay? So that's kind of neat. Okay? Now, you can do this whether you're using default arguments or not. So let me put them all, there's no default arguments, and say, well, I want D to be 5, and I want B to be 2, and I want A to be 7, and I want C to be 1. You can pass the arguments in a different order than what they appear in the argument list. And I don't think I've ever seen this in any other programming language, where you can pass in those arguments in whatever order you want. You just have to tell the computer which ones these things are. Now this is a little confusing because that D is the D in the function scope, and that this B is the B in the function scope. So I could have a variable D be the value 6 in the global scope, and I still get 70 here. It doesn't, this D here is the D in the function scope. This D here is the D in the global scope. So that can be a little bit confusing. Yes?
we got rid of a in my function and then put a number in the front of the comma, no, x, put x.
Here.
Yeah, just put a number in the front. Well, inside of that.
Over here?
No, inside the parentheses.
Over here.
Yeah, if you put like a number in the comma and I got rid of a equals 7.
Yes.
Assume 7 or 5 is, we assume it's a is 7
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Inside of order?
A is going to be 5 because that's the first one and it's not specified. So A is 5, and I can prove that to you.
All of them.
So here I'll print A just so you can see that A is indeed 5. Okay? So yes, you can put some in the order that they are and then specify the rest. So it's very flexible. Yeah, Mike.
Up in the definition of my function, can you put conditional statements in there in those slots?
No,
For instance, D else D equals 2?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think you can put conditional statements in there. D default else there, but I don't know. I'm not a Python expert, so there may be other fancy stuff I don't know about, but I don't think so. Although there are these fancy things called lambda functions, and you might be able to do something fancy with a lambda function along the lines of what you're talking about.
I'm sure I could do it elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really interesting. I mean, just basically to write a function in Python, it's pretty easy. You just specify what the input arguments, you do return, and you say what you want to pass back. You know, so it's really pretty straightforward. Okay, so yes, question before we move on.
Never mind. Well, I was going to say, if you just take that D equals 5 out of there, would it default to 6 in that global scope, like C++?
No.
Okay.
No. So this would probably give an error.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, D was not specified. So even though D exists in global scope, my function has no clue of that. Okay. All right. So what I was thinking about doing was to redo one of our old MATLAB problems where you had to enter 10 numbers and then sort them into the lists of negative even, negative odd, positive even, positive odd. Okay. And that's sort of like what we do for what we're doing for the homework, similar, that you have to put things in a list. But you know what I'm curious about? What happens if I do x equals input enter stuff, and yes, my idea was I'm going to try and see if I can get it to enter a whole bunch of things. Because, like, if I have x and I run this, and I put a bunch of numbers, if I say 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, so that's a string. Remember, that's a string 5, 6, 7, 8. And I wonder, can I convert that string into a list? That would be interesting if I could. What happens if I do convert x into a list? Well, you know what? I'm going to need to... I know that will work, but then the question is, what is list?
You mean like an int to string?
Well, here, y equals list. Let's do this. Right. Converting the ints to strings, but I was hoping that I can get it to put it in a list. See, now look, that's interesting. So y ended up being a list of the character 6, the character space, the character 7. I wonder what happens. Would anything different happen if I put commas? Probably not. There'll just be commas in there. And now y just have commas. So that's interesting.
But if you run them all together, will it make it?
Yes, that's true. I could do it that way, but then I wouldn't be able to have multiple digit numbers. So like if I did this,
Well, no, that's what I'm,
6, 7, 8, 9. So now I've got 6, 7, 8, and 9, but if I wanted to multiple digits or negative signs, that wouldn't work very well. All right, well, let's scrap that and we'll do one at a time then. So sort of like your homework, we'll do a for loop, I is in range, let's enter 10 different numbers, and we'll say enter a number, and then let's go ahead and we'll just convert that to a float right away and store it into x. So take the result of input, convert it to a float, store that into x. Okay? Now we need to get this into a list. So let's say my list I is equal to X. And then let's try and print my list. Okay, now, good old Spider's already complaining to us. And it says, undefined name, my list. Now this is unfortunate. In MATLAB, this would have worked. Okay, even though my list doesn't exist, it would go ahead and say, all right, well, I'll make the first element, when I is 1, I'll make the first element be equal to X. That would work in MATLAB. Okay, but in Python, that doesn't work. Okay, so we need to predefine the my list. We need to make it started ahead of time. Yes.
I got it to split into a list in one input.
What command did you use?
If you do like x equals input enter stuff, and then you do like 1 space 2 space so forth. After you do x equals x dot split parentheses.
Okay. So there's a split command that is, I guess that's a member function of the string.
I don't know if it's a member function.
Yeah, because you did x dot split. Yeah. So there's a split command, and that does vaguely ring a bell. So it looks like if you use a split command on that original string, you can get it to put it into multiple places. So that's a way you can enter the entire string and get to break it into pieces. So that's good. Thank you for looking that up. So if you're interested, you can look at the split command. Let's go ahead and continue doing it this way because it's similar to what you'll need to do in your homework problem. So we need to predefine the my list. We need to get it to start off with something. Okay? And so basically we need to get a list of 10 things. And of course I could do something like my list equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? And if I do that, I think this is going to work. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. So there we go. We got in all of our floats. Okay? So that works, but it's a little clunky. Okay? Now, let me see if I can remember this. There's a really interesting thing. Let me see. I'm pretty sure this works. Yes. Okay, so you look at this and you're like, what the heck is going on? Okay? What does the multiplication operator do when you have a list? Okay? So what this does, it's multiplying a list on one side and an integer on the other side. Okay? So, I mean, what the heck does that even do? And basically what it does is it'll take 10 copies of that list and concatenate them all together. So let's go back to this Python here and we'll say if I do 1, 2, 3 times 3, well, I guess I want to store that somewhere. 1, 2, 3 times 3. Okay. Whoa, that was really weird. Why is it asking me to enter a number? That's really strange. That's the weirdest thing I ever saw. Is that running? That's not running anymore, is it? Alright, so now it's working like I expect it to. I don't know, there's something weird going on with the spider that I don't understand. There, so that's what I want to do. So if I take a list and then multiply it by an integer, it takes that list and copies it the number of times that the integer has. Okay? So it's unfortunate, you remember that you can't do this. You can't do 1, 2, 3 plus 1, 2, 3. That does not give 2, 4, 6. Here it actually concatenates them together. Okay? So if plus concatenates, then multiplication should concatenate many times. Okay? So the arithmetic, I wonder, what is minus? Does minus do anything? I don't know. No, it doesn't. There's no such minus operator for lists operating on a list. Okay? But the plus and the multiply are concatenation operators if you have lists. So, you remember when we did C++ and you're doing operator overloading, a plus will do whatever you tell a plus to do. And like, for example, one of the old test questions I had is I had a class where the thing were colors. There was like red and green. And if you did red plus green, it would make that to be yellow. You know, so it added the colors together to give something. So that plus symbol doesn't have to be arithmetic. It can do whatever you want it to do. You can overload it to do anything. And for lists in Python, plus concatenates, multiplication concatenates multiple times. Okay? So when I do the list 0 times the integer 10, that will concatenate 10 zeros in a list. So my list will be initialized to have 10 things. Okay? Now, also in the other way in your homework you're supposed to do this is by appending things. Okay? So I can do x.append 10, and what that does is it puts the 10 on the end of the x list. Okay? So append is a member function, or in Python they call them methods. So append is a member function or a method of the list data type. And whatever you pass to it, it will add to the end of your list. So in your homework you're supposed to do one list this way where you predefine the size for it and fill it up as you go, like we did here. We're filling it up as we went. Okay? And then the other way is that you're supposed to then start off with nothing and then build from scratch. Okay? And the way you start with nothing is you can give an empty list. So x is empty, and then when I append something to x, then the 10 gets in there. So in one case, you're going to start off with a predefined size of a list. The other way, you're going to start with an empty list and append to it. Okay? So that's how you're going to work on that first problem. Okay? All right. So the whole idea here was for us to get a list of 10 values. And we could use Jake's split idea, or we can go ahead and use this one. Okay? So then what I want to do is I want to have a function that we'll call it entire list. I'm going to pass to my function. I'm going to pass to it my list, and it's going to get it. It's going to be called entire list here instead. And what we want to do is we want to figure out which ones are negative and which ones are positive. Okay? Now, unfortunately, okay, I cannot do this. Okay? Just like I'm thinking in MATLAB, I'm thinking, hey, this is fine. I say, well, is 1 less than 0? Is 2 less than 0? Is 3 less than 0? It doesn't work that way. And the reason, again, is because I could have this. I mean, these are lists, remember. They could have anything in there. They could have some things as being strings, some things as being integers. So, yeah, is 1 less than 0? Yeah, that makes sense. Is this thing less than 0? Well, I don't know. Maybe that makes sense if you think element-wise. Is this thing less than 0? What the heck does that mean? Okay? So because lists are so flexible, even if you just put floats or integers in there, it's not an array of integers or lists. Okay? So one way we can get around this is to have a loop inside of here. Okay? So we could have for I in range of the length of entire list. Okay? Len is a function that returns 4. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 things in the Y list. So we're going to loop through however many things are in entire list. And then I can check. I can say, well, if entire list's ith element is less than 0, I can do something. Okay. Then I can say, let's see, neg num. Oh, we need to do both. We need to do. It needs to both be negative and it needs to be odd or even. So we can say if it's less than 0 and it's interesting. You don't use the ampersands in Python. You actually just write out and. Then I can say entire list I %2 is equal to 0. So the percent is the modulus operator, just like it is in C++. We've done that sometime in this class, haven't we, in C++ in one of the labs? Okay, and so if that number modulus 2 is 0, then it's going to be even. Okay, so I'll say neg even dot append, and I'll add it entire list I. Okay, now neg even needs to at least exist, so neg even equals, I'll start it off as an empty list. Okay, now this thing here has been indented twice, well 3 times actually. It's been indented once to be inside the function, it's been indented once for being inside the for, and then it's being indented again to be inside the if. Okay, and then for now let's just go ahead and return neg even. And just to make things a little faster, I'll go ahead and only enter 5 numbers instead. Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and print what my function returns, which is going to be the negative even numbers. Okay, so I think this should work. I need to be here in the Python console. It's not there. Let's see, let's run it again. There we go. So enter number -2, -1, +1, +2, -4. So it returns a list with the -2 and the -4 in it. Okay? Now, of course, we could go through and do the negative odd, positive even, positive odd, etc. But what I'd like to do instead is to rewrite this using the NumPy. Okay? Because the NumPy stuff works like the MATLAB matrices and arrays that we're used to. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import NumPy as NP, so I can just type NP instead of NumPy. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this list and I'm going to convert it to a NumPy array. Okay? And so now that list that was a list of numbers is now going to be an array. Now why doesn't it like me? Oh, well, I haven't used it yet. Well, I'm getting to that. Patience. It's upset that I haven't used entire array yet. Okay, so now what we can do is we can use logical indexing. So we can say neg even an index where entire array is less than 0 and entire array modulus 2 is equal to 0. Pretty sure this should work. We should be able to do it all in one fell swoop if I'm not crazy. But it doesn't like me. Neg even equals entire array. There we go. So happy with that now? There we go. Let's run it and make sure that it works, and then we'll explain it. Okay, -2, -1, -5, 4, 1, 2. No, we get a... right. Okay. All right. So, at first I thought this might work. You know, this is, what I would expect out of MATLAB, where I say, is the entire array less than 0? Okay. And that should return a Boolean. Entire array modulus 2 equals 0. That should return a Boolean. It should. I mean, let's do that. Let's print this thing. And let's print this thing. Let's run that. 2, -1, -5, -6, 7. Okay, what do we get? Okay, so it did. It did true, 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 false. Okay, that's asking whether they're less than 0. The first 4 are less than 0, and then the first and the fourth, the 2 and the -6, are also even. Okay, the others are odd. So each individually worked the way we wanted it to, but we can't AND them together. And I forgot this. Okay, we can't AND them together like we can in with MATLAB. So we need to do. Let's see, how do we do that? I wonder.
Could you rewrite neg-even as the second?
I'm trying to think, because they suggested we use any or all with more than one. The truth of, yeah, okay. Well, let's do it this way. Let me try this. Let's take this and let's multiply it by this one. Alright, let's try that. Enter number 2, 3, 4, 2. So now we got what we wanted. So I multiplied them together. So that's taking a 0 times a 0 will be 0. A 0 times a 1 will be 0. And a 1 times a 1 will be true. Okay, and so essentially I've done AND. Once you take digital logic, you'll see that we actually use the symbol multiplication for AND. Okay, it does element-wise multiplication. Okay, that's what it does if it's a NumPy array. So if I use this now as this piece, I think. Oh, that's not.
It won't take the AND symbol.
It won't take the AND symbol. You can't take, if you do AND. It's trying to ask if the entire array is true. The AND symbol is not element-wise. Okay? Now, I think there's probably another way to do this, and maybe I'll have to look into it. But this is the fastest way I could think to fix the problem. Okay? And there we're getting the -2 and the -6. Okay, so that was the easiest way I could think of doing it, is taking that, when I want to do AND, I multiply. If I wanted to do OR, you would add them together. A 0 and a 0 would add to 0, that's still false. A 0 and a 1 would add to 1, that's true. A 1 and a 1, I'm not sure if you take a Boolean and add 1 and 1 together, I'm not sure what would happen, but that's the general idea. But I'll have to look into it, because there's probably another way. They're suggesting any and all. There's probably another NumPy function that I don't know of. So let me look into that, and we'll see. Okay. All right. I already gone over a little bit. That's for today for functions. Really, you got to start looking at that, especially at that second homework problem, because it's it's involved, and if you don't start that soon, you're going to get in trouble. Okay. All right.